Now, owning an immovable property is probably one of the most exciting things that can happen to an individual. I'm sure even if that individual is young or old, they will always be excited about purchasing an immovable property. Now, as much as this is the most exciting thing that can happen to you as an individual, it's one of the most expensive transactions you're probably going to enter into as a human being. And so we often advise that before you enter into this type of transaction, before you sign any documentation pertaining to this transaction, that you do your own due diligence, that you seek proper legal advice so that you make sure that when you're entering into this transaction, everything is going to be above board, everything is going to go smoothly, and you're not going to have any complications when you are in and part and parcel of this transaction. Now, even though we advise this on our many videos, we do see that a lot of people still don't do this due diligence. And when they are in these types of transactions, there's always a reason that they find, and as a result, they want to exit that type of contract. Now, the most painful thing is that when you have already signed and alluded to entering into this type of transaction, it is not easy to exit it. It's not easy to say, you know what, I'm canceling this process. Normally, if you want to do so, this will come at a cost. And so today, I want us to talk about something that I want you to actually look into before you enter into this type of transaction in order to save yourself the stress and the financial consequences and implications that come with just entering into this type of transaction. So what are we talking about here? I'm talking about considering and understanding the financial responsibilities you are going to have as the buyer in this transaction. So we've seen that a lot of people do not consider these and often find out when they are already in this type of transaction that they're going to be responsible for 1, 2, 3, and 4. But in their minds and in their preparation, they're only prepared for one set of costs. And by this time, they can't even exit this contract. They now have to find money, and they don't have it. So today we're going to discuss all of those costs, or some of those costs that we think are important for you to consider before you enter into this type of transaction. So let's get into the content. But before we do so, let me introduce myself to the people that are new here. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza, and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. So let's dive into the content. So what's the first type of costs that you need to prepare for? I'm sure this one everybody knows. People that are involved in part and parcel of these types of transactions, they already know this type of cost, and that is the purchase price. The purchase price obviously is the price that the seller is selling this property at. They're going to probably use an agent or sell this property on their own and tell you that I am selling it at this amount of money. That is what we refer to as the purchase price. This one you should know obviously, because this will determine whether or not you can afford to buy this property. So that's the first cost that you need to understand that you're going to be liable for as the buyer before you enter into this transaction. Now let's talk about the second type of costs that you need to prepare for in majority of the property or immovable property transactions, and that is the transfer fees. Now these costs are costs that you have to pay to an attorney. Now these costs, what are they for? In order for you to get the seller's name removed from the title deed, you need to do what we call a transfer of ownership at the deeds office. So in order for this to happen, an attorney has to lodge certain documents at the deeds office, and then the transfer is going to be made from the seller's name to your name. Then we will recognize you as the owner. Now, in order for this to happen, unfortunately, you have to pay. And where are you paying these fees? You're paying them directly to the attorney who's going to be doing this work. People often ask, can I transfer the property on my own? Definitely not in SA. In South Africa, you have to do this through an attorney we call the conveyancer. Now, this attorney is the one that's going to do everything at the deeds office and make sure that the property is transferred to your name. And in turn, you have to pay them the transfer fees. Now, how much are the transfer fees normally in a property transaction? It will depend on the value of the property. So every time you're about to purchase a property, what you can do is literally look at the purchase price and go to STBB Direct. There's a website. You can literally go there. They also have an app. There's a calculator where you can actually calculate the transfer fees. You just put in the purchase price and it's going to generate how much money you're going to have to pay for everything pertaining to the transfer of this property. And whatever it is that the calculator shows as the transfer costs, you as the buyer are going to be responsible for that. And so you need to make sure that you budget for those costs when you're going to buy this property. Guys, these costs are important. Otherwise, the property cannot be changed to your name. And so this is going to be problematic for you. So you need to make sure that you budget for these. So a lot of people, unfortunately, don't even think about this. Or sometimes they've got the understanding, I don't know where it comes from, but they've got the understanding that the bank is probably going to cover this if they are going to get a bond from the bank. Let me tell you now, the bank is not going to cover your transfer fees automatically. The bank only covers the purchase price and other costs that they will list on the bond or pertaining to the bond, but not the transfer costs. This is for you. This is the cost that you have to bear. So you need to make sure that you're going to have access to this amount of money when you're going to buy this property. Otherwise, try to get a cheaper property so that you can make means or find means to pay for the transfer costs, because these are important if you want to have a smooth property transaction. So the other costs that you need to prepare for are costs we refer to as the bond registration costs. Now, this is applicable if you're going to buy a property via a bond or through a bond. Now, what is this bond registration cost we're talking about? So remember, when the bank is giving you money to buy a property, what's going to happen is that in the title deed that you're going to get, or the bank is going to keep, that is going to have your name, there's going to be your name written there as the owner. And in addition, the bank, because they've given you money to buy this property and you still owe them, they have to write an endorsement there that you owe the bank this amount of money. So this is going to safeguard the bank's investment. And the reason is simple for the bank doing this is because they are protecting their interest. They gave you money to purchase this property, and so they don't want to find that one day you just sell this property and they don't know and they lose their money. It always has to be clear that they have a bond, and so that needs to be endorsed in the title deed. And in order for this to happen, again, this has to be done by a lawyer. You cannot do it on your own. So what's going to happen typically is that once the bank has approved everything and the bond has to be registered, the bank is going to appoint an attorney that is going to take care of this, and you are going to have to pay that attorney those costs in order to get that bond registered. Now, again, this one, the bank doesn't necessarily automatically pay for these registration costs. This cost is for you as the buyer. A lot of people don't think about these or don't, know that they're going to have to pay for these until such time they are requested to do so. Then they get the shock of their lives that they have to cough up more money. So this is an amount of money that you need to at least budget for as well if you're going to have a bond that's applicable in your sale. So when this property is being registered, unfortunately, the bond has to be endorsed. So this is something that you cannot run away from. This is something that you need to pay for because the bank has to be safeguarded. All right, so budget for these fees, know exactly how much you need to pay towards them, or approximately how much you're going to be charged to pay for them, so that you can budget and put this money aside. Like I said, a lot of people don't think about these, and when they get into the property transaction, they've signed all the paperwork, they find out, oh my goodness, there's more costs here and I don't have money. And then when they get to that stage, they want to exit. Unfortunately, guys, if you want to exit when you're there, a lot has happened. So you're going to have to pay for the cancellation of this whole process, which means you're paying for wasted costs. So this is going to be a loss on your side. So which is why I always say, always try to do your due diligence, do your proper investigations, get proper advice so that you know that when I'm buying this property, what are the costs that are going to be applicable? Because here we're just generally discussing some of the costs, but when you're buying certain properties, there could be more costs that you are responsible for as the buyer. Now, the last type of costs that we're going to talk about today are costs that you also need to understand who's going to be responsible for. Normally, typically, these costs, the seller will be responsible for, but in certain transactions, you are going to be responsible for these costs as the buyer. What are these costs? We're talking about municipal rates and taxes. So normally in a normal transaction, you'll find that the seller will be the one who's going to settle all of this and then give you an account that's going to be clear and clean with no outstanding costs. However, if you're buying, for instance, a property out of an auction, normally these costs are for you and you're going to be responsible for those costs. So what type of properties are normally placed on auction? These are repossessed properties or properties that are voluntarily placed on auction by the sellers. Now, if you're buying a property through such means via auction, you're going to be responsible most of the time for these types of costs. So what you need to know or get information on is how much of these costs are still outstanding so that you can be certain that you're going to be able to pay for those costs. Otherwise, if you cannot and you've already gotten into this transaction, you've already bid, you've already done everything, you're going to struggle to get out of this and you will have to cough up money in order for these costs to be paid for. Remember, when you're buying a property on auction, it's not like you're buying a property through a normal sale. There's a lot of costs that are going to be attached to you as the buyer. So it's very important that all the time when you're considering buying such a property, you think and get information from the auction itself on what type of costs you're going to be responsible for, so that you can do a proper calculation. Failure to do so is going to seem as if you're buying a property at a much bigger price, which you did not budget for. And for a lot of people, they think that they have been scammed when they get to this point. You were not scammed. You can get all of those details from the auction, and if you cannot understand these, you go to your legal practitioner and say to them, please, can you explain these costs? I see that they've sent me these documents. I just don't understand what I'm responsible for. Guys, these things are applicable. You can get them. The terms and conditions of the auction are normally shared with the potential buyers. So it's important that you take cognizance, put the excitement aside, and do your due diligence so that you make sure that you assess everything properly and know exactly what you're going to be responsible for, because once you have bid and have made certain payments, it's going to be difficult for you to exit that transaction. So let's talk about the last costs that we're going to talk about today, and that is the auctioneer costs. Who's responsible for auctioneer costs? In fact, what are auctioneer costs? Now, if you're buying a property through auction, there's somebody there who's called an auctioneer who's going to be responsible for auctioning this whole thing. Those people have to be paid. And who's going to pay them? The person who's going to be a successful bidder. You are going to be responsible for paying these fees, and you've got to pay them on the day which you get that property or you successfully bid on that property. So you need to always understand how much these costs will be so that you can be able to pay for them. A lot of people go to property transactions of this nature and believe that, okay, I'm getting something at the bargain. They don't look at anything else. They don't look at the terms and conditions and pitch there. When they get there, they successfully bid. And when it's time to pay, they get the shock of their lives that they have to probably pay like 10% or something to the auctioneer. And then they open their eyes and like, I have been scammed. Guys, you have not been scammed. The terms and conditions of an auction are quite clear. And I have a lot of clients that often come to me and say, please, can you clarify? I'm not understanding this. So if you can't understand, get someone to help you to read the terms and conditions, but everything is often written down. If you don't have the terms and conditions, you are always welcome to request these from the auction and they will provide them to you. They will provide the fees that you are going to be responsible for. They're going to provide you with the municipal rates, what are they looking like, and when you're expected to pay the full amount to the auction. All of these terms you will always get. You just need to do your due diligence and get access to those terms and conditions, and then go and bid knowing very well that you're going to have to pay for certain things. Okay, because otherwise you're going to feel like you're scammed when you get there, but you're literally not scammed. It's just that you never took cognizance of these important costs. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the costs that we were going to talk about that we think you should always consider when you're buying a property. Obviously, these are not the only costs. Guys, there's a lot of line items when it comes to costs related to property transactions. It's a matter of understanding what type of transaction you're entering into, or else who's the owner of this property, how is it being sold to you, and under which circumstances are you going to buy this property. Are you going to buy it on your own? Is the bond going to be attached to this property? How is the transaction going to occur? So once you have this information, it's easy then for us to say to you, you know what, these are the costs that are going to apply to this type of transaction that you're buying into, and that's going to help you prepare financially and also mentally of all of the things that you need to take care of as the buyer. All right, so our advice to you today is that before you sign anything, before you sign that OTP, before you take any other steps alluding to buying this property, make sure you do your own due diligence. Once you understand how much the purchase price is, who's selling this property to you, at what cost, and how you're going to buy it, it's going to be easy to determine how much you actually need to cough up and pay as the buyer. Just make sure that you do your due diligence in this regard, so that when you are in the property transaction, you don't find yourself wanting to exit it, because like I said initially, you want to exit and you've already signed documents here, contracts. It's going to be difficult for you to exit without financial implications. And normally the financial implications are a big blow to the money that you have, which is the money that you probably budgeted to buy this property. So that will be a great setback for you. So this brings us to the end of our discussion today. We literally hope that this has been helpful to you, if not today, in the future. And like we always encourage, if you think this video can be useful to others, please do like, share it to them so that they can also get this information, this educational information that could be useful to their lives and help them steer clear from such mistakes in the future. So my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. We'll see you next time when we have something that we think you should know.